I'd always been the quiet, dependable one, the invisible force holding our family together. My name is Audrey, and at 32, I was finally doing something for myself graduating from the prestigious Columbia Law School. My entire life, I had been the family's emergency fund, the person who paid for my brother's private school, my mother's extravagant trips, and the family home's endless renovations. They called me their rock, a title I'd always believed meant I was strong, indispensable. The shock came when I saw my father standing at the head of the graduation dinner table, not toasting me, but raising his glass to my younger brother, Caleb, for simply getting a promotion at his entry-level job. It was a familiar, painful pattern, Caleb. The charismatic one, the golden child, was celebrated for every minor achievement, while my tireless sacrifices were either forgotten or taken for granted. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Audrey, and I had always been the quiet, dependable one, the invisible force holding our family together with a quiet strength they never saw fit to acknowledge. At 32, I was finally doing something for myself, for the first time in my life graduating from the prestigious Columbia Law School. This wasn't just a degree. It was a monument to years of relentless hard work, of sleepless nights fueled by caffeine and a fierce determination to build a life on my own terms. It was a milestone I earned with blood, tears, and a soul-deep exhaustion that felt both heavy and strangely fulfilling. My entire life, I had been the family's emergency fund, the person who paid for my brother's private school tuition, my mother's extravagant trips to Europe, and the family home's endless, costly renovations. They called me their rock, a title I'd always believed meant I was strong, indispensable. It was a lie I told myself to justify the quiet sacrifices, the small dreams I put on hold to ensure their lives were comfortable and secure. The truth was, I was just their silent ATM, a resource they tapped into without a second thought. My existence was a given, my contributions expected, never celebrated. I was the silent engine, the unseen foundation, while my brother, Caleb, was the ornate facade, the one everyone praised and admired. The shock came, not from a sudden revelation, but from the most predictable of moments. It was at my graduation dinner, a small, intimate gathering at a quiet French restaurant in the city. My friends and colleagues from law school, all accomplished and successful in their own right, made a genuine effort to congratulate me. They spoke about my dedication, my late nights in the library, the sheer grit it took to balance my corporate job with my law studies. They were so proud, so happy for me. But every time their words of praise reached my parents' ears, they were deflected with a practiced ease, a dismissive flick of the wrist. My mother, Eleanor, would smile thinly and immediately pivot the conversation to Caleb. She'd recount how he had landed a job right out of college, how he was making his own way in the world. It was a narrative they were determined to write for everyone to see, a story where I was just a supporting character, a footnote in Caleb's grand tale. The pinnacle of this public humiliation arrived with the dessert course. My father, with a glass of champagne held high, stood at the head of the table. I expected him to toast me, to say one single word of pride about my achievement. Instead, he looked at Caleb, his face beaming with a warmth he had never shown me. "To our ambitious son," he said, his voice ringing with a pride that cut me to the bone, "who is already making a name for himself." The table of accomplished lawyers and professors fell silent, a collective confusion hanging in the air. I could see the subtle glances exchanged, the way my friends' faces hardened with a shared understanding of what was happening. It was an embarrassment I was so used to, a public humiliation that had been a constant companion throughout my life. I felt my cheeks flush, not with pride, but with the burning sting of shame. Growing up, my world revolved around Caleb. He was the golden boy, the one with the natural talent and the easy charm. I, on the other hand, was the one who worked, the one who planned, the the one who quietly made sure everything was stable, while he spent his college years on campus, enjoying a carefree life of parties and friends. I was working 2 jobs and sending money home to cover the bills. He was the face of the family's success, and I was the unseen, silent foundation holding it up. I had convinced myself that this was my role, that my value was in my ability to provide, to be reliable, to be the person they could always count on, even if they never acknowledged it. But that night, sitting across from them, listening to my father's words, the illusion shattered. I saw myself not as their rock, but as their resource. I was the well they drew from, the safety net that allowed them to lavish attention and praise on Caleb without consequence. My graduation dinner wasn't a celebration of me. It was a stage for them to perform their favorite show. I wasn't even a character in it. I was just part of the set design, a silent, static prop. It was a chilling realization, a truth so stark it took my breath away. All the years of sacrifice, all the money, all the emotional labor it had all been for a family that didn't even see me as a person. The months that followed were a blur. I started my new job at a prestigious law firm in Boston. Burying myself in work, I was good at it, great even, but the emptiness inside me lingered. I thought that by achieving my dreams, by finally having a career and life of my own, the validation I craved from them would magically appear. But it never did. A month after graduation, my mother called, not to congratulate me, but to ask for money to help with Caleb's new apartment. It was always about Caleb. My father would call, but only to complain about the rising cost of living, never to ask about my life. I was still their source, their emergency fund, their quiet burden. Then came the cabin. It was a beautiful place, nestled in the woods by a quiet lake, a perfect getaway. My parents had always talked about owning a second home, a place where the family could escape the city. So I bought it for them, secretly, putting a down payment on the mortgage and setting up an automatic payment plan. I told myself it was a gift, a way to show them how much I cared, how much I wanted to be a part of their lives. It was my last desperate attempt to buy their love. Their approval, I believed, with a foolish, lingering hope that this grand gesture would finally make them see me. But the real test came during a quiet family dinner at that very cabin. The air was tense, the silence heavy. My mother, Eleanor, began to talk again about Caleb's career. "Audrey works so hard," she said to my father with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But it's a shame she's not as ambitious as Caleb. His new job is a real step up, a ladder to something more." It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it. A quiet, almost casual venom that cut deeper than any shout. It was a confirmation of my deepest fear their neglect wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The shock was the quiet contempt in their voices, the way they spoke about me like an asset they owned, not a daughter they loved. They saw my accomplishments as a means to an end, a source of income to fuel Caleb's dreams. They didn't see me. They saw my salary. That night, something inside me finally broke. I couldn't pretend anymore. I didn't want to be their rock, their silent savior, their emergency fund. I wanted to be me, a person with her own life, her own accomplishments, her own worth. The next morning, with a calm that felt both alien and liberating, I confronted them. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply said, for years, "You've taken everything and given nothing back. I've worked my entire life to be the daughter you wanted, but it's clear you don't actually want me. You just want what I can give you." My mother's face twisted into a mask of cruel indignation. "Audrey, don't you dare talk to us like that," she spat. "We are your parents. You owe us—" The shock was her sudden, violent lashing out, throwing a porcelain vase across the room. It shattered on the stone fireplace, the pieces scattering like the remnants of our family. That's when the truth came out, raw and unfiltered. "We wish we had never had you," my father said, his face red with rage. You are nothing but a burden, a drain on our lives. Those words weren't just spoken, they were a death sentence for our relationship. I stared at them, the truth of their hatred finally laid bare. There was no going back, no fixing this. Then, in a moment that truly shocked them, I pulled out my phone. It wasn't to sell the house. That would have been too easy and too drawn out. Instead, I opened my banking app, navigated to the automatic payments, and with a few taps, I canceled the mortgage payments for the cabin. The bank would foreclose in a few weeks. The cabin you're standing in now, the one I just bought for you, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. The mortgage is in my name, and I've just canceled the payments. The bank will foreclose in a few weeks. This is what you wished for. Now, you'll have a chance to see what your lives look like without me in it. The shock on their faces, the way their features sagged in disbelief, was a chilling sight to behold. It was the first time in my life I'd ever seen them speechless, truly lost for words. I didn't wait for them to recover. I walked out and didn't look back. I got in my car, drove off, and never spoke to them again. The months that followed were filled with the quiet liberation of building a new life. I focused on my career, joined a firm in Boston, and met a new group of friends, a chosen family, who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. We built a life full of genuine care, mutual respect, and unconditional love. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth or to seek their approval. I was happy, truly and deeply happy. Years later, the click of the phone echoed in the silence of my apartment. I held it for a moment longer, a cold piece of plastic in my hand, before placing it gently on the table. The frantic, pleading voice of Caleb still hung in the air, a ghost of a life I had so definitively left behind. I didn't feel the anger I once did. There was no victory, no sweet satisfaction of revenge. Instead, there was a quiet, almost unsettling emptiness, the calm that follows a long and brutal storm. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the heart of Boston. The city lights twinkled like a million distant stars, a vibrant, living tapestry of people, stories, and futures. It was so different from the quiet, suffocating life I had known. The first thought that surfaced was not one of triumph, but a question. Was I a monster? Had I become as cruel as them? Turning my back on my own family, a family who, despite everything, was still connected to me by blood. My mind, an uninvited guest, began to walk through the corridors of my past. I saw myself, a younger Audrey, hunched over a laptop at 3 a.m, a stack of bills and Caleb's tuition statements spread across my desk. I remembered the fierce, quiet pride I felt sending that money, a belief that my sacrifice was a testament to my love, a secret language we shared that would one day be understood. I remember the countless times I bit my tongue, the words of my own accomplishments dying on my lips because I knew they would be met with a dismissive wave or a cutting comparison to Caleb. I saw myself in the mirror, tired and worn, but believing that one day my parents would see me for who I was, not for what I could give them. It was a foolish hope, a brittle, fragile thing I had clung to for so long. And then the memories turned darker, sharper, the graduation dinner, the clinking glasses and the cold, unyielding words. We wish we had never had you. They weren't just spoken, they were hurled at me like stones, meant to shatter my spirit. They weren't an argument, they were a final verdict, a statement of fact from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. In that moment, the secret language I thought we shared was revealed for what it truly was, a lie. My love, my sacrifices, my very existence to them was a burden. The guilt that had momentarily clouded my mind began to dissipate, replaced by a clear, cold clarity. How could I be heartless for refusing to help those who had no heart for me? How could I be cantient for walking away from a relationship that was built on a foundation of conditional love and emotional manipulation? The emptiness I felt wasn't from a lack of compassion, but from the simple, profound fact that there was no longer anything to give. They had taken every last drop until the well was dry. My refusal wasn't a punishment. It was a simple act of self-preservation. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and they had emptied mine long ago. I thought about the family I had now, my friends, my colleagues, the people who celebrated my successes without a second thought and supported me without conditions. They were my chosen family, a testament to the fact that love is not a birthright, but a bond forged through mutual respect, kindness, and unwavering support. They had seen me, truly seen me, and loved me for it. The faint smile that had touched my lips earlier returned, this time with a deep sense of peace. The past was a landscape I had walked through, a harsh terrain that had shaped me but no longer defined me. The call from Caleb was a final, desperate gasp from that old life, a door that had now been firmly shut. I was no longer the silent victim of their narrative. I was the author of my own story. And this chapter was filled with a quiet, profound happiness. I was free, I was alive, and I had a future that was entirely and beautifully my own. I turned away from the window, leaving the past behind me, and walked toward the promise of a new day.